Mr. Foreign Minister, thank you so much for meeting with us. I know it's been a busy day. It's been a very busy week. The theme this year for the United Nations General Assembly was rebuilding trust and reigniting global solidarity, accelerating action on the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals towards peace, prosperity, progress, and sustainability for all. That is big. How do you think this week went in terms of achieving that?
At least, if not achieving it, but at least there's a consensus about the need to exert more effort to preserve the multilateral system, to recognize where we have succeeded and where we need to exert more effort, and to set our sights on an expedited effort to meet the challenges and to respond to the difficult situation that we find ourselves in as an international community, whether politically in terms of the conflicts that exist and the inability of the multilateral system to effectively deal with them, in terms of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and the fear that many countries are not going to be able to hit the targets that they set out to achieve, but also dealing with the current economic environment and what was initiated in COP27 and in the other Global South multilateral formats related to the need to reform the international financial system, the burden of debt on many of the developing countries. The lead up into COP28, and to what extent commitments have been respected and honored in providing the finance, in dealing with loss and damage, and the funding of the achievement that was a highlight of COP27, which is the funding of loss and damage. I hope that with the consensus that exists, that there will be now implementation of all of these areas of reform so that we can regain the level of trust and deal with the commonality of the challenges.
There's been a lot of high-level meetings between leaders in China and Egypt of late. We've watched a lot of that going on. How would you describe the relationship between these two countries right now?
It's a very special strategic relationship. We have elevated the relationship to new heights and continue to coordinate and to extract mutual benefit from a relationship with very strong foundations in history and in our association to civilization, old civilizations, and their impact in forming our common heritage. And we value greatly the level of cooperation and coordination and similarity of views in many areas, whether political or economic.
The Belt and Road Initiative has hit its 10-year mark. Your president was in China not too long ago, and he talked about how pretty much the BRI dovetails with Egypt's own 2030 vision for comprehensive development. Can you talk to me about that relationship between these two countries, how the Belt and Road Initiative does dovetail with that, and where do you see that relationship going?
Well, we think that the interconnectivity that is created by the Belt and Road, the potential subsequent effects in increased levels of trade and commerce and the relationships and investments opportunities that the expansion and the refinement of the Belt and Road Initiative will create, the dynamics that fulfill our developmental objectives and take advantage of the infrastructure that we have developed over the last 10 years. So we are set to the implementative stage and see the value of greater economic integration among states that have traditionally always had a very strong bilateral relations.
We saw China broker a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. What does that tell us about China's role on the global stage and involvement in your region of the world?
Well, China's involvement has always been welcomed. China has taken principled positions in support of many of the issues of interest to the Arab world, to Egypt. There is a parallelity of views on many of the situations that has arisen in our part of the world. And there's a high degree of confidence in that China does operate on the basis of the principles and of the Charter, and thereby its involvement necessarily as a permanent member of the Security Council and its stature adds additional elements of weight and the ability to impact issues and challenges in our part of the world and elsewhere. I think it's a matter of the interconnectivity between all of the regions of the world, and that for countries that have the ability to positively impact and resolve crisis and also meet the challenges, China is certainly in a position to do so.
You're in an area that has some tensions. In fact, there's tensions between Egypt and Israel since a border attack in June, and this ongoing turmoil that we see. It's a story that just never seems to end, Israel and the Palestinians. Can you talk about the plight of the Palestinians? There's been so much talk here in this country, the United States. It seems like every president appoints somebody to do something about the Middle East piece. You know, it was George Mitchell, and then it was John Kerry, and I mean, the list goes on, and yet nothing seems to get done. You're there. What's that like, and how would you describe the plight of the Palestinians?
Well, just as a qualification, you started by tensions between Egypt and Israel, and that isn't the case. We have a working relationship and a high degree of coordination and a relationship which is built on the foundations of the peace agreement, and that we continue to address the bilateral relationships. And any incidents that do occur are quickly resolved within the coordination between the two countries. So I wouldn't categorize as there being any tensions. There is at times a variation of opinions, and we do have issues that we raise with our Israeli friends, foremost among them how to address the Israeli-Palestinian issue. And we support both the Palestinian and the Israelis in promoting dialogue and the return to the peace process, so as to implement what is the international community's recognized resolution of the conflict, which is the two-state solution. We've held with Jordan the Aqaba and the Sharm el-Sheikh process to decrease the level of tension between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and to facilitate confidence-building measures and their ability to work together to maintain tranquility, so that we can open subsequently more in-depth dialogue as it relates the resolution of the conflict. But certainly we recognize that the current conditions and policies of the Israeli government has not been as forthcoming as we wish, and we continue to have an open dialogue to encourage the Israelis and the Palestinians to forge forward and definitively resolve the crisis or the situation between them.
You look around your region, you can look to the south, and there's Sudan, where there's also fighting underway. What role does Egypt have in trying to bring about some sort of peace there? And when you look at that and the loss of life and the fighting, what are your thoughts?
Well, of course, Sudan is our direct neighbor to the south. We have a long history of association and interrelationship at the people-to-peoples level. And we are highly concerned with the conflict, the military nature, the effects on the humanitarian conditions, and the instability that the situation can produce in the region, and that can have a ripple effect as it relates to the neighboring states. We have been in consultations with all of the various Sudanese political elements to advise moderation, cessation of hostilities, broadening the political dialogue to resolve this crisis, but also to put in place roadmap for the future. We have expanded that when President Sisi hosted at the summit level the neighbors of Sudan, again, a group of countries that have strong relationships and contacts with Sudan and are at the same time the most affected by the instability and by the influx of our Sudanese brothers and sisters who are seeking shelter and refuge from the current conflict and the consequent economic burdens that are attached to that. The summit delegated to the foreign ministers who met in N'Djamena to put in place practical measures that could be implemented to relieve the crisis, and that was done. And we met here again to refine and to distribute the responsibilities in implementation of the roadmap. And we do so in consultations with the other formats, whether it's the trilateral, the quadrilateral, the African Union, the IGAD. I think the situation is of a great concern to the region. Might produce very adverse consequences, create a vacuum that will be taken advantage of by the spread of terrorism. So we have every interest to do whatever we can to resolve the conflict.
But regionally, when you look at your map and your neighbors, I mean, you can look to the other side. Here's Libya. There's still fighting going on there. There's instability in Chad. Not too far from you is Yemen, where there's a civil war. You're involved in the business of dialogue and trying to bring people together. And so talk to me about the region. Are there areas where you see some glimmers of hope, or how do you view things?
Well, maybe the glimmer of hope is that Egypt, stable, is on a road of renewal. It has achieved a great deal within this last 10 years in stability and engagement with its neighbors, and being able to have a wide and broad associations regionally and internationally to benefit its developmental objectives, but also to forge better understandings and more stability and security. And we will continue to play, this is a traditional role, in helping to resolve conflicts, in addressing the issues that exist practically and objectively, with a view of regaining the equilibrium that unfortunately has been lost over the last decade or two. We see the fragmentation, the implosion of the state system, which is the guarantor of the provision of the will of various peoples, whether in Libya, in Sudan, in Yemen, anywhere else where we need to regain the credibility of state institutions and provide them the ability to respond to the needs and aspirations of their people in collaborations with their partners and whether at the regional or international level.
We've talked a lot about your region and the fighting, but it seems like when you look at the headlines, what's really captivating most of the audience in the world is what's happening in Ukraine, the fighting there. Clearly, your government has a non-involvement policy with regards to Ukraine, but it's created global divisions. It's sparked high inflation, food insecurity. I'd like to get your thoughts on what's happening in Ukraine and its impact on countries like yours.
I think it's had quite a considerable impact, as you mentioned, the food insecurity, the inflationary pressures, the rise in energy costs. All of this has had an effect, a very negative effect on our developmental objectives, especially that it comes in the aftermath of 2 years of the COVID, and consequently this has compounded the negative effects not only on Egypt but on very many countries in the developing world. And we will continue to encourage a resolution of this crisis, utilizing diplomatic means, recognizing that in conformity with the Charter of the United Nations, that conflicts should be resolved through peaceful means, and also the recognition that the consequences of this conflict has had ramifications of a wide nature, and in globalization, the effects can be global in nature, and thereby have an impact on the normal man and woman in the street.
BRICS, Egypt's been invited to join. How important is it joining that bloc?
Yeah, it's a very important development, something that we have sought and have had very strong bilateral ties with all of the original members of BRICS. So our inclusion into this grouping, I think, will be beneficial for Egypt and the other BRICS members in creating a wider area of cooperation economically for all of us, and increase the level of our coordination, of the volume of our trade, in developing more tools to address the challenges that we face in the economic and financial sectors, and be able to speak with a unified voice related to what we started with, which is the reform of both the multilateral system and, more importantly, the global financial and economic system. The world has changed, and I think BRICS is well geared to be a representative voice of the Global South.
Minister Shukri, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.